My name is Joseph Perry Hancock. I was born in a family that believed in God. As I grew up, my parents, my father and my mother, taught me that God lived and that He answered prayers. I can remember when I was a young boy, my mother came in my bedroom to put me to bed, and she knelt down with me and said a prayer. And the prayer was so different. I had a strong feeling that there was somebody in the room. And so being a little boy, I opened my eyes and looked around. I didn't see anyone, but I knew that someone was there. Other things happened to me in my life, things that made me know that the things that were taught when I went to church, and I saw the way that my father and mother lived and what they did. I knew that they were strong in their testimony of knowing what it was. And so in my young years, I began to believe in the things, but I later on began to see that my testimony was borrowed because my parents had taught it to me, and I believed them, and I thought that was true. But I came to the time that I needed to know for myself, and so I began to pay attention and work with things. I prayed about it. And over a period of many years, I came to the time that I knew that God lived and that He answered prayers and that He loved His children here upon the earth, and He wanted us to follow Him and to return home. Now, I had several experiences in my life that helped me go on with that. One of them came one night. My father and mother were going out into the desert for a picnic. And when I asked my dad if I could take one of my friends with me. His name happened to be Joseph also. And but we were friends, and he lived down the street from us. And we went out to the desert, and when we got there, we stopped by a little stream there. It was dry, by the way, good desert one. And so I walked across the stream, and there was a pile of rocks on the other side of the stream, and I started looking at it and not knowing what it was in it at all. And I looked and lifted a piece of rock off the top, and inside was a tin can upside down. And I was just about ready to reach over there. And someone hollered at me and says, "Joseph, look out, there's a snake there." And the voice was as clear as day. And I thought, and I spun around and I jumped. And when I jumped the full width of the creek. And it was quite wider than I am capable of reaching. And as I looked around, and I turned to my friend, my friend Joseph, and I said, thank you for hollering at me. I'm sure glad that you told me that a snake was there. And he says, Joseph, I didn't holler. He says, I heard it too. Being a little bit young, and I just thought that he didn't say that, but and I told him another time that it was, but he said, no, I'm telling you, I didn't say it. I heard the voice too, so in time, my friend and I grew up, and my friend did too, and it was several years before I saw him again. And we got to talking about things, and he says, well, how do you remember about the snake? And I says, oh yes. He says, you know that was not me. I heard the same voice, and then I knew that he was telling the truth, and he was solid. And so, and he said he was glad that I began to believe that what he said was true. And so I was protected by the thing, by the Lord, by the voice that spoke to me. My grandmother used to tell us stories of things that happened, and some of our ancestors she also would tell us stories that my grandfather that I never saw because he died before I think, but he was in Pinedale when they first came to Pinedale, and he went up the canyon hunt for try to find the cow in the morning, and
told that story yesterday.
And that was and they told us, you can just cut that out.
Yeah, you just got it.
And so she would tell stories of all the experiences that they had, and I also read the journals of my forebears. They left journals behind, and they had stories of how things were like. They were able to see, have voices tell them and warn them when there was danger. And I remember also that I was standing on my father had not finished the building in the back, and when I would get up on the top of the building and walk on the thing, and he had a pile of lumber on the underside, and so I decided that I'd walk down the thing, and it was nice, very nice to walk down there because you feel like excited, and quite a ways down to the ground. And so I looked over there, and I saw the pile of wood, lumber, and it was flat, and so I decided that I would just run right over the end of the wall, and I looked both ways down the street. Nobody was there, and as I ran down the street, I ran down the top of the wall, I jumped onto the lumber, and it was sloped, and so I had to run out across the street. And as I ran across the street, I was about not quite halfway across the street, and I turned my head to the left, and a car was coming down the street, and he was only about 5 to 10 feet away from me. And I knew that I could never get past him. without doing something, and I felt the strong thing. There was no voice, but I just knew that I was supposed to run as fast as I possibly could, and that was hard to do because I wasn't to the middle of the car yet. So, but I went ahead and ran, and as I ran, I finally, as I stepped beyond the car struck me on the foot that got across, struck my foot that was still in the back and landed on my leg, and when it hit my wing, it spun me around and I fell over away from the car. And I can remember feeling very strongly that I had been prompted in my mind to know what to do to get out of the terrible mess I was in. Other things have come to me, and I had experiences, many of them, and many of them came when I was in the mission field. One that I will tell you in just a moment. We went out into the country, and we went out without purse or script, and we would have to stay overnight. My father had had that kind of experience, and it was kind of a challenging thing, and then you ask them to give you a meal and feed you, and then so that you can continue on the trail around when talking to the people. And we went, as we went through one night, well, that first night that we were out, we were in the country, I saw this house up on the hill, and my first thought was, well, that's quite a ways up the hill. We probably won't want to walk over there because we knew it would be getting late earlier. And so I started to go, and I felt a strong feeling that I was supposed to go up to that place. And so I said to my companion, my junior companion, I said, well, we need to go up to that. And when we walked towards the gate, a dog from way up came running down, and he was quite vicious. And my companion was ready, and I just thought, well, maybe we not try to disturb this dog too much. But I had the strong feeling that I was supposed to still go up the hill. And so I decided that I would obey my promptings. And my companion, he says, please don't go up there. I says, well, stand in back of me, and I will try to deal with the dog, and let's get up there. So we opened the gate and started through, and he growled very viciously, and then suddenly he turned and looked back towards the house. I didn't hear the word of anything, but he turned around and ran back to the house. And we walked up to the house and knocked on the door. And a fine gentleman came to the door. And in Ohio, the people tend to talk to you through the screen until they know you a little better. And so we talked to him and told him who we were and what we were doing. And we told him about the Book of Mormon. And he said, well, and I said, well, we'd like to leave one with you. And he said, I don't know. He says, I don't know that, I'm blind, I can't see it. And I said, well, then you could have your wife read it to you. And then he let us in, and we sat down, and then we asked him if we could stay. And his wife was afraid, but he says everything would be fine. So we slept the night. He showed us around. He was able to make brooms, but being blind, those terrible blades running around to make brooms, and he knew how to do the chickens. Took me around, and my companion around, and saw all the things. It was very thing. And we saw him. He told the story of why he was blind. He was kicked by a mule when he was trying to put shoes on the mule, and he kicked him and hit his eye, and it destroyed the eyeball. And the other one was bruised badly too, and it lasted for a little while, and then it was so badly bruised that they had to take it. So he had no eye sockets at all, and it was a very pleasant thing, and we appreciated it. The next morning, the wife gave us the king's feast for breakfast, and it was very warm, and we bid them farewell and went back down to the bottom at the road and then out the gate, and there was a house across the street. And so I said, Elder, let's go to that house right there. And it was a little bit early, but he said, okay, let's just go. So we walked over to the house across the street, knocked on the door, and the lady came to the door, and she says, how did you get here so fast? I says, what do you mean? She says, well, anyway, we found out that the neighbors was calling down the lines and telling people that we were coming. And she said, how did you get here so quick? I says, we stayed in the house up on the hill across the street. And she said, how did you do that? And I says, we stayed the night there. She says, well, do you know who he is? And I said, no. And she said, well, you know that preacher that preaches on the radio every day? And that says that he had healed a blind man? And I says, yes, I hear the radio and know that many people talk about when we knock on doors, talked about that this preacher had healed a blind man. And she said, okay, we'll tell you, he is the blind man that was healed. And I says, oh. And my testimony was strengthened manyfold, because that man did not heal the man that I stayed overnight with. And the whole countryside that listened to all those stories of how he'd been healed by a blind man. He healed blind men, because when we were in the city, we'd go to doors and they'd say, well, we don't need to go talk to you because we go to the church where the man has healed a blind man. And I gained testimony that he did not. It was a fraud. And so many other things have happened that made the Spirit of the Lord be able to touch my heart and know that the things that we were taught, I was taught by my parents, and they loved the Lord and the gospel. And I had been finding things of my own. My testimony was coming to me that I knew that God was lived and that He answers prayers. And another thing that helped me, I read in my journals of my forefathers and the stories that they told. And now I've had, and many others, testimonies. I've had the opportunity of giving blessings to people when they asked for them, and that they would be healed, so that they would be able to do it. So I knew that the priesthood I held was true, and the gospel I taught the people would listen was true. And I know with all of my heart and soul a testimony of my own.
So Joseph, can you tell me more about your mother?
Well, the thing that I often remember about my mother is that she was always bright, smiling, and happy. She didn't mope around and feel sorry, and we lived in the days of the Depression, in the days of the Depression, but yet my mother, she would be working in the kitchen, and she would sing, and so it was just a beautiful thing to have her around, and she would always sing, and then she would sit us down, and she would tell us stories or read to us when we were younger in Pinedale, and then when we went back to Mesa, she would always, in the evening of any day or week, and things begin to slow down and you begin to relax and get ready to go prepared to go to sleep, Mom would sit down and she'd start talking, and she'd always talk about the gospel and the things that we ought to do, and she was always teaching us about the gospel, and she'd tell us of what she knew about the church, and it was something we did. And on Sunday afternoons in Mesa, well, in Pinedale as well, but we'd go into the room. It was the room where they kept the bookwork in the house, and we'd all go in there, and everybody would, after church, we'd go in and sit there and say, I'd get one of the books and look through it. I was tremendously interested in mechanical things and things of that nature, and I would look through that book and I would read it, and then Dad would read what he was doing, and Mom, and then Bonnie, and the rest of the children. We'd all be sitting around in that small room and talking to one another, and so Sunday afternoons was a very family item, and she always was striving to teach her children about our Heavenly Father, and she did it well. When there was difficulties arise, she would somehow or other she was a peacemaker. When our folks died, our parents died, I was called upon to design the headstone. And I put on I prayed about it quite a bit, and I finally found out what I should make. And I knew that the statement that I needed to put on my mother's stone, and it was peacemaker, because that's what she was. When the things went upside down, she had a magic about her that she could calm the breeze. And so this is one of the things that I really loved my mother for. She was always so kind. She was gentle with every child she had. And that they all knew that they were loved and appreciated.
Okay, Joseph, can you tell me any other stories? Do you have any other stories you want to tell about Mother? Do you remember anything? If not, we can go on to something else, but...
Well, it was interesting. On one day, we were first in Mesa. Bonnie was the oldest, and I was next. And since there were only two of us in the early days, we were the ones that had to do the dishes. And I was quite interested about my mom's. And she would cook meals for the men that were going out and working with Dad and stuff. And so there was quite a few dishes that needed to be washed. And Bonnie would wash dishes and I would dry. And then the next day I would wash and she would dry. And I can remember that when I had to dry, I'd be over there standing by the cupboard and I'd bump into the cupboard door because I was tall enough. That's just my height. It'd nick me on the top of the head. And but one thing that I noticed, as quick as she emptied the pots onto the plates, into the bowls on the table, she washed the dishes. She washed the pots immediately. And I thought that was a little unusual because, I thought, but anyway, I began to see that it's a very wise way to do it. Because by the time she had that done, they were all out of the way. And then when the day was over, then we put the other dishes over and then we washed them immediately. And it just didn't if you wanted to go out and play, you get the dishes done first. So she was very efficient and knew how to take care of the family and do that. Mother, she was so... When she talked to you, you couldn't help but know that she loved you. She was a very precious and loving person. And she would tell stories to us. It's the other thing. She just loved to tell us stories and read to us and have the family sitting around in the room at any time, in any place. And so I was very grateful for her. When we were living in Pinedale, the greatest thing I'd love to do was to, after I eat breakfast or something, I'd love to be able to go out into the down the trails and around the house and go out and climb the trees and walk through the fields and and go over to the creek and look at the pollywogs and the frogs and every place. And I just loved to go in the world around me. And when it was summertime and we weren't in school all the time, Mother would, she would let me go wherever I wanted to go. Pinedale was a very small place. You could couldn't get very far, and besides, I wouldn't go very far because so what I'd do, I'd just go out and do it, and I'd go down through and I would look at certain weeds along the roads, and I'd eat some, and it was kind of hot. And I learned that was mustard plants. And then there was other plants that were edible, and I could eat those. And so I'd go out and play around, and I'd never be coming home until in the evening. But I knew that what was going to happen. And so my mother, she would go out to the back porch on the house, and she would stand on the porch, and she was a high soprano voice, and she would put her hands up to her mouth and say, Joe-E. And when she would hit that E, it would be, you could hear it over the whole place. And I knew that after a couple, she would say it about twice, and then I was supposed to come home, and so I did. And it was always so, and I love hearing that high soprano voice of my beautiful mother. Joey! The rock house was only had 2 bedrooms and a living room and a dining room and a kitchen and a bathroom. The bathroom most of the time wasn't finished because there wasn't any place for the sewage to go out to. So we'd just wash our hands and stuff, but we had to go to the outside toilets to take care of that. But anyway, and when we were younger, Bonnie and I would be in the same bedroom, the little bedroom, and my folks would be in the other. And the days came when it's time for us to be separated because she was growing up, and so was I. And so there wasn't any place for me to have a bed except in the attic. And so I would go up. When there was a sign, I went up I took iron springs and put that on there, and placed it on it, and then I put some blankets over it, and made some other things, and then I'd make the bed, and I found out that Mom, when it got dark, we only had lamps, and Mother would walk over to the steps with me, and I would walk up to the top of the stairs and to get in bed. And by the time I got up to the top, my mother would walk away, and so the last 2 or 3 steps was in the dark. So I got to where that I would fold my bed, make it all over, and then fold it open, so that when I got up to the top of the stairs and stepped over by the bed, I could feel the blanket, and I would lay down in it and say, And another thing happened to me too, you know. I'm up there in the thing, a young boy, and I always would say my prayers. And I felt like that it was very important for me to play the prayers, because it was at times frightening to be up there all alone. And in the night, sometimes we were only about 5 miles from the big drop into the valleys. We were up 6,500 feet in Pinedale, and as the wind came across the tops of those hills, it'd go and the noise, it was a little irritating when you're a little boy and you're all alone up in the attic in the dark. And so that was interesting and a very interesting experience. Well, I probably should tell you some of the places that our family, the places where our family lived and how we got started. My father was in the early days was working in Mesa and Phoenix, and he was helping them build roads. And in between helping build roads with cement, he also would milk cows, some 35 or so each day, night and morning. And while he was working around in there, he went to the Mazona. That's where they had the dance office in Mesa. And when he went in there, he saw this sweet girl, and he was impressed with her, mainly because she was with her mother. And if he thought a woman would be honorable to her mother and appreciate her and be there instead of just going off and leaving her. So he managed to get introduced to her, and he decided in a very short order that he would marry her. But when she heard that she was going to have to finish school, and she was going to do this, and she didn't know if she wanted anything like that. And my dad had decided that if he was ever going to be able to make a living, he needed to have some way to make a living that was better than what he was doing. So he went to school in Los Angeles to learn a trade. When he went into the building to learn, he took a friend with him, and they had a sign up on the board telling what trade that it was and how much you made. And my dad didn't even look at the left-hand side. He looked at the right-hand side because it gave how much an hour you got. And he ran his finger down the thing, and until he found the one that had the most money, most price that earnings you could get by the hour. And the two that were the largest was stonemason and plaster. He didn't want to be lifting a lot of stones all the time, and so he says, all right, I'll be a plaster. He says, I didn't care. He says, I can do anything I want. I'll just learn to do that one. And so he became a plaster. And then after he finished, he started plastering. But he remembered Mom, and so he began to try to talk to her, and I don't know how many times he went places, but anyway, that began the times when he said, now I know how to make enough money that I can support a family. And so Mom and Dad finally got together. She said she wasn't going to marry him a couple of times, and finally asked her to do, and she said, all right, I'll marry him. So, and he said that the choir that he was with in Los Angeles was going up to Salt Lake City and going to be singing in the choir in the tabernacle, and there was 200 or 300 people in this thing, and they were all going up there. So Mother seemed to be the time that she was going to say yes, and so she wrote a letter back to Dad and says, well, I'll marry you. And so they worked a way where she could go over there to with an escort, and then when she got there, she stayed with the people that were taking care of her as an escort, so that they wouldn't be together before they ever got married, and nobody would make up anything. And Dad stayed where he was, and then so Mom came, and then the whole choir, they got up there, and when they got up to Salt Lake, they got married in the temple, and did it so that people wouldn't make up all kinds of things. Oh, you know, that they were alone, and that because they weren't. And so, and then when they got through, they get married there. They lived in Los Angeles, and what's way? Hawthorne. And lived in Hawthorne, and his dad was working there, and they were there long enough that my sister Bonnie was born in Hawthorne, California. And then my mom decided that she wanted to go back and live in Mesa and Phoenix, and so they decided they would go, and they went to Phoenix, and they bought a house, and in Phoenix, I've forgotten just where, and they was trying to buy another one, and then Mother was going to be having another baby, and it was me. And I was born in this same month that the depression came, and the what do you call it?
The Depression?
The Depression. The stock.
The stock market fell.
The stock market fell to the ground, and I was born. It was September or October that the stock crashed, and I was born in September the 22nd. And then there was no work, so they couldn't pay the payments on the house. They lost the new house. And they wondered what they would do, and they decided that they would go back up to Pinedale and fix up the old log cabin, and then they would try to live what are you going to do, because there was nobody plastering or doing anything. And so Dad went back up there, and he knew how to, and started fixing up the log cabin. He plastered the inside of the walls in the living room, and added an extra some more room on it to make a decent kitchen, and got those things there, and that's where we lived.
And where did you sleep?
I slept in a bedroom just across from the kitchen, and
On the addition part.
on the addition part. And that was where my mother was when she said prayers with me one night I just knew that there was somebody in the room. And so that was it. And then they refixed it up, fixed the roof and everything, and that's where we did. And that was a nice place because it was only a small jump over to the stream, and so I could play with the pollywogs and everything else and water around, and it was there. And my dad, when he wasn't working on the other things, he would work. He bought some property, and he was making a house on it, and he was making the house out of stones. So he picked up stones out of the wash, and put them together and stacked them up. Built a house out of stones. Had concrete floors, and an attic and a roof, and tin on the roof, and that was the new house. After my mother was teaching school and going back and forth, and so it was when there was a time when my father pulled the tobacco out of his pocket. He was, and I asked because my mother was taking me to school, because she babysat me over at school while she was teaching the first, second, and third, and fourth classes, and then I was over there theoretically as a place to live. They gave me crayons and I could do most anything I did, and so when we came out that one morning, my dad was trying to fix the car, and the radiator was leaking, and Mom says, yeah. And so I ran over to my dad, and I stepped over and said, "What are you doing, Dad?" And he says, "Well, I'm fixing my radiator." And I said, "Oh." And Mom says, "I've got to go, Joseph, let's go." And I said, "No, Mom, I want to stay with Dad." And so she says, "Dad, can you stay?" He says, "Yeah, I'll let him stay, I'll watch him." So she went on over, walked over the stile and over to the church to where the school was. And I was looking there into the radiator cap, and looking there and look at it, and when I looked up, my dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a sack of Bull Durham tobacco, and I broke into tears because I knew that was not right, and I was only 3 years old. And I knew it was not the thing to do, and I could not stand to think that my dad would do something like that. I said, "Daddy, what are you going to do with that?" He says, "Don't worry." He said, I bought this to fix this radiator. He said, "I'm going to pour it down inside the radiator, and it'll get caught in the holes, and then when it dries, it'll dry up on it, and it will seal the holes, and the radiator won't leak anymore." And I was happy as a jaybird in spring. And I was very happy, and he fixed it up, and then he could go around and do the work he had to do. And all the timing that finally the day came that they finished the house. And and after we got that finished, and we abandoned the log cabin, and went to the house and lived. And while we were living there, it was nice. A lot of wonderful things happened. My father became a member of the bishopric in Pinedale, and I didn't know that much about it, and learned. It's interesting in a little town. Pinedale had 100 people in it when these days were happening. And anyway, so now that's where after we lived there for quite some time, this was the time I began to love and appreciate my father more. I always loved him, and he was always happy. He'd pick me up and do all kinds of things, and when he finally things were getting better, he would leave Pinedale and leave the family there, and then he would go to Phoenix and do plastering. And he was having a tough time plastering, but and then he'd have to stay, and finally we'd get to. He would come back, and I can remember how my heart was broken. Not broken. How much I missed my father when he was not there. I almost worshipped my father. He was always there, and he was always gentle, and he always was teaching me something, having me do this and stuff. And now he's down in Phoenix, and I can remember my heart aching, and I would be so happy when he would show up. And the days came when we eventually, things were doing, and found out that Dad was making a house in Mesa, Arizona. It's close to Phoenix. And after we got there, he'd worked on it, and finally when it was built enough that we could get in it, we came. I was very close to 8 years old, and so when I was 8, we went to Mesa, and since it was cold in Pinedale, you don't put a small kid in the cold river to get baptized, and so I got baptized in the Mormon temple, in Mesa Temple in Mesa, and I was so thrilled. And when we arrived, we were only a half a block down the street from where the temple was. And I can remember after everybody got settled around, I took off over, and like I did in Pinedale, I ran all over the place. And so I just took off over, and I went over and looked the temple over. I went over there, and they had the gate on it, and I looked over, I walked over there and put my face up to the the iron rods that made the fence, and I couldn't quite see it. If I was back here, I wanted a clear view, so I went up and put my head right up against the iron gate. I mean the iron rods in the fence, and I could see it. And as surely as I live, I had the strongest feeling that I knew that what I was going to do the next day was true. That was the temple, and that was the baptismal font place where I would be baptized, and I knew that it was true as surely as I do now. That came to me that it was real and it was important. And so in I went. And after we had after I was baptized, then they took me into the foyer, and my father had somebody help, and my father gave me the gift of the Holy Ghost, and I knew that was true, and I knew when I went under the water that it was a thing that says it washes away your sins. I knew what it was about and what was all of that. And then so I found out that in the days to come, while we were in Mesa, first thing that happened to me was when I get up in the morning and nothing else to do, I would walk down to the temple grounds and walk around them and go back underneath the trees and stuff. And as I was walking around, some brethren would often step out of the back door of the temple. They'd come over and talk to me. And I was one of the little people there, but I absolutely enjoyed being at the temple because it was pleasing to me. When I was a little boy in Pinedale, I had freedom to roam where I wanted to roam. And then when I got to Mesa, I roamed where I wanted to roam, and one of the places I roamed to was the temple grounds. And over there, and just being there was fun. But I finally got a bicycle for a rig, and I would ask my mother to make a lunch for me, and I would go out towards the desert, and I would ride my bicycle 4 or 5 miles out into the out east towards the that mountain, whatever it is. Superstition Mountain. I didn't get that far, of course, but I would go that way, and I would go out and I would have my little lunch, and I would find one of the trees that had a little bit of shadow in it, and underneath the shadow there was usually a little bit of grass, and I would check for snakes to see they weren't around and bothering. And I would sit and eat my lunch, and then I would get around and walk around out in the desert and look at it, and I had a new Pinedale. And after I'd wander around, then I'd get on there, and that was quite a distance. And my mother let me go. And it used to make me wonder. But so I just love to do things like that, and what wonderful